and whatever I see is smiling at me. Love is who I am.
Hello there everyone, and welcome to this month's Energy Ascension update. This is for May 2018 and of course is beyond. I have a few notes prepared as always, and I was really tuning into the energy of the current events that present themselves to me as, in a way, what is the so-called spirit initiation of this time. And usually this will be sometimes physical occurrences or events that will signal some kind of a opening towards the new energy, because in truth that's what initiation means. Initiation is an unfolding that opens us up to higher consciousness energies so that we can really bring them forth and eventually, of course, integrate and embody them. So I'm calling this update, as Spirit presented it to me, as the liberation of the goddess and the spiral teaching. Although from the human perspective we call it a teaching, from the perspective of all life in creation it's simply an essence of life. It's a creation principle. And as you know, I have an audiobook gathering or compilation that's on my books page on Serapina Light webpage. I have designed, and I call them my Elohim series. There's many different mini audiobooks that present the higher perspectives of life that I call creation principles, that I am sharing through the family of light of Elohim and the creation principles perspective of life, which is a higher opening towards life in a much bigger grand design. So what do we have this month? Goody. Well, this is kind of like a mystical month, because what I'm feeling is, every month there is initiation of the new energy. But if you look at it from the perspective of astrology, we might say, well, this is rather mystical because we have, I think Chiron is moving into new sign. I think it's Aries from Pisces. And we have especially Uranus that's moving from, what was it before? And also Aries, but now it's moving into Taurus. So why is this energy called the liberation of the goddess? Well, I'm going to present you the teaching, but I just want to say that as Uranus shifts signs about every 7 years, and again, I'm not an astrologer, but I include this as an indicative of how it aligns with our unfolding ascension process, because things don't, in a way, perpetuate our destiny, but they do influence greater cycles, our own inner cycles we're right now experiencing and moving through. So Uranus will be at the same time moving into Taurus, that we will have a new moon in Taurus the same day, right, which will be around 15th or 16th of the month. And we just had a Vesak full moon that was in Scorpio. That was as you know, Scorpio is always a sign of deepening of union. Wherever we are currently at in our journey of beloved union, and beloved union is not a partnership. Beloved union is an inner alchemical process where the polarities, they're constantly playing, this game of life and intermingling with each other, that within us they establish the harmonious relationship, and that they're integrated in an equal or equilibrium manner of expression of life. So divine union is an internal state that may represent itself as an external expression in relationships and whatever we're creating or co-creating on this planet. So May is a 16, which adds up into 7 months, which is always for me very deeply alchemical presence. That's why I feel it's kind of like a mystical month, because 7 for me, it's always spirit, it's always mysticism. It's that revelation of principles of life that we maybe haven't considered before, especially on the level of collective humanity, because we often are so occupied or preoccupied with things that we don't really devote ourselves into witnessing higher perspectives of life. And that's why I have these mini audiobooks to present a bigger vision of life in the grand design. So this is, in tarot, we know it as the Tower, or if we add up the numbers, it comes out as the Chariot. And Chariot is the initiating energy of ascension, as the wheel of ascension. That is the physical ascension journey or process. So in my Cosmic Union and Ascension Union course, I have actually described all these tarot aspects as cosmic principles of life from a much higher perspective than we use when we do daily readings or tarot readings or attunements. That's kind of like a bigger perspective of how the story of creation, as it moves out and expands, and the human standing somewhere as an important pillar, how to, initiate this journey of self-awakening, self-realization, and self-actualization. So when you actually witness the physical alteration of your vibratory field that affects your physical presence. So the basic full moon in Scorpio was a strong initiation or an instigator of the sacred feminine principle of life. And I will read you at the end of this video. I don't have it with me now. I have it on my phone, and I've written or channeled some writings that came through directly from Spirit about this liberation process. Because when we say the sacred feminine principle of life, this does not relate to women. Although women are really becoming empowered in the world, and they're no longer standing still or holding their voices inside, and they're really getting ready to express their hearts. So, when we sometimes witness people and how they are, I witness it sometimes with the people who are still rooted in the old perceptions and the old dogmatic energy of belief systems. They will often get very entangled in the perception of we're fighting. You say something that will just be an expression of your truth, and they will still see it like something that confronts them and their truth. So therefore, it must deny their truth, or it must negate what they are feeling. So they're going to instantly start to react, and they're going to say, I don't want to fight. I want to keep up the appearance. So that's basically false. It's not really us living in this conditioned state where we keep things under the surface just to come out a certain way. And I've met a few people in life who rather kept things on the surface. They didn't want to go deep. For them, everything that kind of was an expression of truth was too much. In a way, it was too provoking, thought-provoking, or it was too triggering for them. It's like, I don't want to fight. I don't even talk about it, So basically, that's like this closed-off energy that in a way you still hold beliefs of just being in your truth, even when someone else expresses theirs. So this moon, and I've heard someone share about that this moon actually activates the divine feminine principle of life, which is getting very active on this planet. So I channeled my own writing about this. I'm going to read it at the end. For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, where I share all my posts, sometimes on my Facebook profile as well. So this moon was a strong activation, and it will continue to be aligned with this Uranus moving into Taurus, because as you know, Taurus is ruled by Venus, and it's an earth sign, and Uranus is a fast-moving energy. So it's almost like that combination of fast-moving electric energy, but then how it moves through the feminine principle of life. So this is basically a very good perspective or analogy of the divine masculine and feminine when they're actually merging. So I actually drew, as a part of my cosmic drawings this month, a spiral and consciousness and the electrically charged masculine principle of life emanating from it and together creating union, which was something that Spirit was showing me. So they coexist, the spiral teaching or the spiral essence of life, and then the electric energy, which Uranus very much represents, that electric, fast-moving energy. So it will also be in connection with Mars. I think they will have some sort of association. I don't know which one. Again, I'm not an astrologer, but I heard it, and I feel it's very much activating the dormant codes. And for a few months, I think we're going to have that exchange. Some astrologers called it reformation time. It's major change time for how we view our life, our values, also Taurus's values, because it's, again, ruled by Venus, and everything we love. So value through love. And I see so many times knowledge or information is becoming more important on this planet than love. And I've recently witnessed this when, I've watched a few videos from David Wilcock. I've shared this with you, and this other guy they're working together with. And then there's a new guy, and all these informers, of what's taking place behind the scenes. And I actually saw a younger man talking about, who's actually David Wilcock? Is he this or is that? And I was reading through comments, and what I noticed was so many people down there under comments expressing their own version of reality, and just simply describing the person like, yeah, he's an egomaniac, yeah, he's like this, oh, he's, everyone had their own version of how they perceive the person. And I was so disappointed when I read through that. I said, well, how who are we to determine the experience or the, the representation that another being is? We call them all sorts of things. They're coming from our own story. It's just from our mind. It's what our mind picks up. And I'm looking into this. I'm asking myself, well, where's the love? People will see one thing that distracts them or annoys them, but they don't like. They immediately make up their whole mind about the person. We don't know what's their life situation, what's their soul learning growth experience, why they're a certain way. Even if they are that way, we perceive them to be, but then why? What are the bigger factors here? And we're constantly playing out this role of a judge. So we know that's called judgment. And the thing is, we put ourselves in this position whenever we put someone on a pedestal, because when we do that, they do something or say something, it's not fully what we want them to say or what we want them to express. And then the moment that happens, we also will be disappointed. And then in that disappointment often comes that judgment. And then we say, well, now I have it figured out. And the love factor, that respect, is missing. And when I was browsing through those comments, I was so highly disappointed, because whatever anyone does in their own perspective, they also have a human factor here, but they still do it. The reason behind it is love, even if a part of their expression will be egotistical, even if a part of their expression will be something I'm not saying it is, but I'm using that as an example. Even if it is, it's behind, there's always this drive of love. And recognizing that and being grateful for that, when it comes to us and others, is that which will align us with this feminine principle of love, of life. So it's that divine grace, beauty, compassion, which is not the same as, this evaluation system we think we're entitled to, but we're not. So we are truly here to embody love, not say, well, this information was given or this was disinformation. Well, how do we know? Unless you have evolved yourself through life force mastery to a masterful state where you see the bigger picture, you can't tell. And most of the people right now, where they are in their consciousness, cannot tell things that way. And when they're saying these things, are just their expressions, their distortions, their perceptions. And remember a while back when I was myself being molested and harassed by whatever forces that definitely were not of love, because love does not do that. Also, there were all sorts of descriptions about me that they're not true at all. I'm like, who are we to continue to pass that torch of hate and separation along? And even worse, pretending that we're doing it from awareness. When we're doing it from non-awareness, but then we say, well, we're aware of that's like this, and then we use so much judgment, and that's not of love. So the feminine principle of life that was strongly initiated through this full moon in Scorpio, and I felt it very intensely in my own experience, really wants to move us into this graceful state of deep appreciation for life, the embodiment of life essence itself, not just talking about life, not just rendering life to a bunch of sets or experiences or whatever you think it to be. So this month ushers in, that was the quote from Spirit, ushers in the new embodied feminine principle of life, which is especially coming strongly through the first wave of graduates, and I talked about it in the previous video, who have completed the first preparatory level of Ascension. So when we say the first level, okay, what does that mean? What was before the first? What's after the first? It's not meant in a sense like the linear sense. It's meant that the proper light quotient build-up that we require in our physicality that will move us into a next state of new human consciousness existence. So that's what's meant here. So I'm going to read you here what was shared with me. The key point at this time is to stay really present with the energy. We say, well, what does that mean? I'm always present. A lot of the times as humans, we like to say we're always present and we're always thinking the best of ourselves and the highest of ourselves. I witness that a lot. But we're all still carrying the human component, which makes us less than fully present and less than fully conscious and less than fully witnessing life. We might observe sometimes things, but are we truly witnessing life through us? So when it gets too intense, it is important to slow down and soften our energy field. That was the basic feminine principle of life teaching. The goddess principle on the planet is currently holding two strong positions. First, the peaceful warrior goddess that holds the sacred space of loving truth, wisdom, courage, and graceful feminine presence. So it's that sometimes distorted perception, which we feel, okay, so the warrior, right? The warrior forges ahead, and we're constantly pushing through like, going against the flow, but it's not truly like that. The peaceful warrior is the alignment with the inner integrity, but sometimes it's very strong, it's fierce. So it might be this piercing sense of energy, but it's still feminine in its expression of life. The second one is the rumbling Kali aspect, which is here to instigate change. So that's kind of like a different version of that fierce but stable, softer. It's as the balance between the two polarized aspects is held together within us. So we have to become embodiments of that. As firm and sovereign individuals, we minimize the effects of the so-called planetary changes or catastrophes or disasters, whatever we call it. So that was the first feminine wisdom trying to come through. The second thing I want to talk about is also what I'll read you towards the end, is that, the goddess was witnessed for eons of time in human history in different ways. And now in this New Age movement, the goddess is always seen as, women are now saying, all of them, I'm now a goddess. But there is a very subtle difference between embodying the living essence of the feminine principle of life, is the embodiment of that life moving through you. And life holds both polarities, as you know, divine masculine, divine feminine, and birthing divine child, which is the union part. But then there's all these people now in the New Age needing to reaffirm that, or to constantly confirm that, like, I am the goddess. And there's a difference between the egoic perception of the goddess embodiment and that flow of Holy Spirit, which moves through us when we simply realize we're already divine. We don't need to be special to feel divine or have a connection with the divine outside of us. And that was the channel message that I'll read you in the end. And it's fullness of scope of what the new liberated feminine truly is. So stay tuned for that. But in my own experience, I had the sacred dance that really called me on the Vesic full moon. And afterwards, I really wanted to go, there's this experience I had, I really wanted to go outside in nature and be somewhere in the forest or on a mountain beach to be under the full moon. And I was so excited about it in the morning. Then the evening came and I was already tired because it was, as always, so hyper creative that day. And I couldn't go. My body was like putting me to sleep, and I had all this presence around my head area. It was almost like the angelic forces were kind of caressing me and telling me, oh, look, it's just good. Just hush, hush, go to bed, just sleep, listen to the body. And the wisdom coming before, and I set up this tiny little altar for myself, was the body card, the embodiment, the body, how the body is always where it needs to be. So sometimes the difference between where energy goes. So in the morning, there was this sense of, oh, I really want to do that. I'm really aligned with that. And so much joy was coming forth that in the end, I no longer needed to be there physically. So the feminine principle of life teaches us it's not always as it appears to be. Sometimes life is mystical, but sometimes things will evolve differently and they will expand us differently that maybe we first thought. So let's say I needed to channel a lot of energy into that process, which was, sitting underneath the moonlight. And, this feeling sometimes we have, we need to do this special ritual. And nowadays, everyone is doing these goddess workshops and the womb wisdom and all these things. Now every second woman in the world is, I think, doing that. I'm like, okay, how do we need so many people doing the same thing? Okay. Not trying to be, filtering through that experience. But I want to say is that there is, from this observation of that phenomena, you can witness the difference between the principle of life, which is that magic, life is pure magic, ritual is everything. So you don't have to chase the ritual. You don't have to make it, come to the ritual. It comes to you as you. Everything is sacred. So even when we say, I'm just tired, I'm resting now, and it's about being in alignment. So the highest aspect or essence of ritual is when you're truly aligned in integrity in each moment with that magic inside of you. And whether that magic is bathing under the moonlight and thinking it's something special, or it's just lying in your bed and being aligned with your body fully so that you feel that softness of energy. And these are two aspects, this peaceful warrior, the stable, the spiraling essence, and then the Kali, which is also the destroyer aspect, which sometimes people fear. But in ancient cultures, they described it as it was because they recognize that that's also part of life. So in order for new things to be born, sometimes destruction and creation takes place. But in highest aspect of the grand design, it's not really seen as destruction. is the human eyes that appears that way, that see it as such. So the next topic was that, again, it's aligned with this whole aspect of true love. So we are here to really become the most refined instruments for the divine love embodiment, the embodiment of the sacred feminine principle. I've shared at the end of the year 2017 about the goddess embodiment. Now, when this astrological year started in 2018, it really started to get not just a calling, it started to get really action-based. So if we were in a line, let's say we had a pack of things we think we needed to do, and then life just said, release those and let new magic come, because things that no longer align with what we truly are right now in this moment, not somewhere 3 months ago even, or maybe just 3 weeks or 2 days. And then we really allow that flow of life force moving through us and bringing us the opportunities that, as I always tell you, life force always moves, and that's the life force of spirit, not what you perceive as forced energy. It's not the same thing. And the life force of Holy Spirit moves always with the highest potential. So now about the unconditional love that moves us into a state of divine love. So as we know, we're here to embody love. That's our ultimate expression of life, our ultimate highest calling. It's not to build informational highways. That's really one tiny aspect of what love, as that force of life moving through everything, every part of creation truly is. So I want to talk about these old ego concepts of love, true love, versus deserving, worthiness, and all that, which is basically a false, manipulated, distorted concept. So that worthiness, so we say, well, love is when you're worthy of receiving or worthy of giving, whatever it is. We, in that consciousness or unconsciousness, we always kind of have to work at it. We have to work at giving. And a lot of times we give to overcompensate or to nurture ourselves. What we perceive is when we give to someone, we're actually nurturing ourselves through that aspect. And the spiraling teaching, which we're going to talk about next, is something completely different, because it's not aimed. It's not, it's not focal. Like, this is how I do this or how I achieve that, by giving that person or that situation love. So we, in a way, we give to deserve or have love in existence, to have even a meaning in existence. So recently I watched one of these Sadhguru's videos, and he talked about this example of giving through, who was in the story? I forgot. It was a few days back, but it was the story of Shiva. And there was this example of one man who constantly wanted to, as it was in the story, right, in their ancient scripts, constantly wanted to give. But that giving it created a ripple effect where he had to take care of the mice, and then the cats came and could eat the mouse, and then, well, I have to take care of the mouse, so turn it into a cat. Then the dog came, wanted to have a cat, and it was like all this story. It ends up being a mouse. He changed into a lion, which lion is the most fierce animal, but it still held the heart of a mouse. Okay, so in a way, it couldn't express itself truly as a lion. So it ended up being totally distorted. And the basic teaching and the meaning of this is that we can intervene in life in a way that we're going to save it. We're going to give or take care of something in order to save something. And I'm witnessing in relationships, because that's again an old construct, that mostly women are playing mothers of men, but not just they're mothering their men, they're mothering even other people, taking care of everyone, and then eventually becoming the boss. And it's almost like, okay, the feminine wants to rise up, but see the butterfly, but not in a distorted way. And I've recently witnessed, I've observed this relationship of two people. The feminine is really the boss, and what I've noticed is the man, he actually shrunk. He started really stop using his voice and expression. He kind of like really shrunk. But when I was next to him, he was always like cheerful and saying things. And then the woman comes to him and is like, do this way. Like she's in constant control of him. And then you're looking at that. Is that really a feminine, masculine, balanced relationship? No. It's a mothering. It's a smothering. And a lot of these mothers actually produce, I'm going to say produce, because in a way it is a production. They create, that's a better word, a lot of children who we say, well, that's a mother's boy. Well, it's not the child's fault. A lot of women have taken on these roles of mothering, smothering, then they actually create almost like emotional handicaps. And it's really not a person of sovereignty, because someone's always held a hand over them, and they couldn't express unless they were a really strong person. But in many cases, it was like they tried to kind of stand up for themselves. It kind of, again, becomes out of balance until you truly enter the path of self-knowing, self-realization, and awakening. So going back to the Shiva story, which was, it is what the master said, it is more natural to share in terms of consciousness, so that you have to elevate the state of consciousness of that being, because you can give, but it is the person that is ready to receive. Are they ready to receive at such a level you're giving? Because you're giving and they're getting used to it sometimes, or they're not ready to receive. So you're giving a lot of energy that you're just basically throwing away. And this is what we're going to learn later in the spiral consciousness. So it's more natural, again, to help to raise the consciousness, so that the person will raise their level of awareness to be able to receive on their own, naturally, organically, from source, from life, because they've generated that consciousness on their own. So we do that a lot of times in what we call the third world war. A lot of times it's because of war, as you know, countries. And we say, well, we're giving them. Well, what are we really giving them or feeding them? Really a bunch of crappy food like white flour and white sugar. So we're basically just creating bodies that getting a lot of distortion, because they're eating such low quality foods, and we're saying, well, helping. No, we're actually keeping the maintenance levels, and the governing forces are actually doing that to keep them at that low state of consciousness level. So that sourceness, when we're really tuning into the organic nature of life, to be masters of life force, to not attract, but create everything through life force, is different than someone constantly needing to give us. And in a lot of relationships, we're always saying giving versus receiving, but that's still not divine union. Divine union is equality. It's just mutual sharing, and it's that infinity symbol loop. So how is that represented in partnerships? And this is when we get to talk about the spiral wisdom or teaching next. So in partnership, how is that expressed? So this is what I've channeled. So how much of what we think is love and compassion in our human nature is actually attachment and even addiction? We have to be willing to look into it. Otherwise, we won't really become illumined in our partnerships, because a lot of times I witness people saying, well, I have to go in my cave, I have to be alone, and they actually have an issue in sharing the energy, and they have an example, well, just share. And they still rather retreat and say, no, I have to do this alone, if their issue is already in that withdrawal of being alone instead of sharing. And they're going to continue to repeat that pattern. They're just breaking through the next step. Again, it depends. But a lot of times we can get really attached to something we perceive, and we don't want to move forward. And why is this important? Is because relationships will always be there. They're part of our human experience. We are, as the principle of life, always a spiral, but then there's also an infinity symbol, which you're going to see in the drawing I have for you. So it is not about, in love, it's not about who gives more or less in terms of competition. As you can see, a lot of times in relationships, people say, well, I give more than you do, so I'm better. I work harder at the relationship. First of all, no one should work hard in a relationship. That's not really an illumined partnership. So that's the first thing. If you notice yourself saying that, oops, go back to the start. What's really causing this? What perception or belief is really causing this? So it is about giving, basically sharing. Sharing is a more illumined word, from an open heart in full transparency, and then observing the laws of divine reciprocity playing back. Which means it's not about competing who's better, who gives, who's worthy, who deserves more or less, or contributes to the relationship more. But it's simply to see what is harmonious, and how sharing that we're a part of, we're co-creating that sharing space in our sacred space, in our devotion to the relationship itself, not just us and our own illumination, but in relationships we have to extend that and reach the level of partnership, because everyone can feel very much illumined sitting in a cave, but in partnerships is where we get to practice how we really master that in life in general. So how our sharing contributes to the harmonization process of divine balance, or when is it distorted and out of balance? Because as Sadhguru also said, this life is not just about becoming peaceful. that's not the meaning, the ultimate meaning of life. It's about that alchemical balance that you can, in what we call the yogic path, the tantric union path, what we call it. So I'm going to read you this now, and then we're going to move into the drawing for the spiral teaching. So the new human consciousness, and that way of that consciousness is about sharing our essence of life freely. That's an aspect of us, that's this unconditional love. So when it doesn't come back to you from one specific source you're aiming at, then we always get disappointed or frustrated, and we say, oh, that person doesn't love me back, or that situation is non-responsive, or I haven't really reaped the rewards of what I've been sowing with the projects I've been doing, whatever I've been investing in, because we were so aimed at a specific target. So that unconditional love is not just without limits, but it's also how to say this, it's free in the way it expresses itself. So that's why the principle of life as the goddess aspect, the feminine principle of creation, is that freedom, that liberation in how we express. So we can't limit how much we love and how much we give. It's just whether when we focus it on something and it doesn't reap results and it's not a reciprocal energy match, then why we get disappointed? It's obviously a sign, look, you're bumping your head against the wall, because the other fraction, the other, like the mirror, hasn't developed, let's say, enough light quotient within themselves so they can share as equally, let's say, as you do, or vice versa. So you have to understand the process instead of blaming, shaming, judging, finger pointing, saying you give more, I give less, or vice versa. I don't know. Just trying to play it from different positions, so there's no, jealousy here. So it's about life sharing of our essence freely, but not necessarily as in giving it to someone or something specific. Again, that focal, targeted aim. When ego gives with a specific reason or intent, so let's say to gain a friendship or a lover or a project you really want or something you really want to get, we might always be at the end disappointed because we might not get what we wished for. When the soul gives, and that's the soul perspective, when it gives unconditionally, we don't have an aim, a specific targeted intention, agenda. We simply share our essence freely, so that from that spiral, right, of the creation of life, as we contribute to life through our own essence, that's always going to be individualized. So then we observe the response of life force when the energy is returning. So when that flow seems to either lack, for example, there will be a lack of balance, and it will show us where our giving has become too punctual, so too aimed, focused, targeted, directed. And we will be asked to expand that punctual awareness into the spiral of life. So in the spiral consciousness again, we're going to see that in the sketch. So that's the new energy way, is to not say, well, that relationship doesn't work for me, but how are you unconditionally tuning into the spiral of life that aimlessly, freely, limitlessly, unconditionally shares itself without needing a specific target or aim. So recently it was this example, right? Again, someone ordered a mandala, but then they didn't pay, and they said, that was in the physical life, not, online, because people always need to pay first. And there was this whole distortion, and we said, it's no longer available, that's okay. But then I was really called to share that on my Instagram, and just someone said, wow, that really helped me to confirm the healing I had, because it was about the awakening divine masculine. And you see, when you share it from a perspective of it's not aimed towards this person or that person, when you freely share, and it's so lovingly unconditional, and this is what I always did in my work, it's always going out. I can't work with a specific focus unless someone really wants to work with me an individual session. And even in the individual sessions, I always channel something that will be later for the group. So that's the thing. It's that essence of life, which is, it's non-focal. It's not aiming towards something which will always bring you disappointment, because no one in the world right now will give you the same way, the same amount, just be how you are, the exact same way as you are, and then you're going to be disappointed, and then you're going to say, I'm going to stop loving, I'm going to stop sharing myself. People even close off their hearts. No, that's the old concept, because we're coming from conditional love and being reserved and not trusting life. Sadhguru recently, I watched this, it was in the same video, I think. He said, well, people always say these people are naive, right? Someone takes them for a ride. He said, no, they're not naive. They're just skeptical of life. They're just, when you're always thinking ahead in a certain way, and it's a preconceived notion. So there's a difference, and we call ourselves naive. So when there's nothing returning our way, through that infinite loop, there's not enough life force quotient or life force activation that can freely flow back to us in that infinity loop. Example would be from a situation, person, or project maybe you've invested in and it's not coming back. You have to withdraw again from that, and you move back into the infinity point in the middle, into the spiral. So we have to channel the flow of our life force energy back into the center, and then from that point expanding it out to again become a spiral. So in the example of a relationship, we're going to do that here. I have this drawing for you. It's based on relationship. It's because our relationships reflect the entire principles of creation and cosmos, how everything works, how it all relates with each other, right? So imagine if there's too much energy coming at something that doesn't know how to reverberate that flow back, because let's say it hasn't attuned to its own individualized essence through that unconditional beingness, then there's so much energy channeled to something, it explodes. You know, we had examples when civilizations, worlds were ruined because of that. It's just so much energy channeled, and it was really not an infinity symbol loop kind of consciousness. So in our own principle of life and how it reflects here life on earth, we have this basic relationship through the infinity, right? That's the infinity, and that's the spiral of life. So let's say we take a point of relationship. There's this number one being or person or situation, and then there's number two. So let's say this being has gathered more light quotient than this one. And when they're relating with each other, they're not always equally aligned. So let's say to a certain extent it works, right? It precipitates, it flows, but then at a certain point it feels kind of heavy. When it feels heavy, it means like the energy is not moving through. Let's say this one isn't allowing themselves to receive as freely. So let's say non-harmonious aspect would be not just like, okay, you give more physically, like I gift you more with physical things. No, this is about, let's say this one shares themselves fully, transparently, no secrets, just pure being. And this one still has maybe some reserves and not fully trusting always or sharing themselves. So they're not going to be sharing as freely and openly with each other, because this one maybe hasn't really brought their full illumination into a state of total wholeness within themselves. So when this happens is we will feel kind of like a heavier energy, and it's kind of like, this is the point where we say, there's a sense of losing balance, or there's a lack of balance, so the loop is kind of broken, and we have to return the energy back into the spiral. So the infinite spiral is that infinite spirit life force. We here as humans are the recipients and the transducers of cosmic life force as that part of consciousness that experiences life in that way, okay? So here, when the energy feels like it's not returning, it's like, right? So when something is stuck, it can't flow, it can't return, right? So basically that's what it means. It doesn't mean the person here is bad, doesn't mean the person doesn't love you, but has that person or situation here has had enough expansion within their own light quotient activation, so they've reached that state where this full transparency can also be witnessed and experienced, and this infinity loop can always feed that way. So in full illumined union, people talk about twin flames. I don't do that. I talk about illumined divine union. In illumined divine union, this flow is constant. And even if there's a feeling of, what is this denseness? There's an instant recognition of it, that it's almost like a lotus flower that blossoms. The sun is coming and shining and saying yes. So it opens up and it creates again, there's like a constant recognition, whatever feels heavy, constant recognition, illumination of it, and again, and it just continues to flow. But usually people, because their awareness point, because they haven't gathered enough life force quotient, they haven't done their life force mastery work. So this is where we get disappointed, and we say, that person doesn't love me, or life doesn't act the way we would want it. And instead of feeling that, what we want to do is, when this feels like that, it doesn't feel the flow it doesn't feel that reciprocity is coming back. This is when we have to do life force mastery work. And this means we always say, well, I'm going to retreat from you now because you don't give me what I want. No, this is about withdrawing the life force that you've invested back in and pulling it into the center, into the spiral, so that there's moments in life, and I'm not saying this dynamic is bad, you always have to be the spiral. No, because we have human relationships, we experience life from the spiral, But we bring life into, let's say, a cosmic state of divine union, of illumination, through the conscious recognition of that principle. So that means basically we're allowing ourselves to be human. We're allowing our relationships to grow and expand. But we don't get too discouraged when the energy feels heavy. We don't feel disappointed, and then we get conditional. We say, I'm never going to give you anymore because you're worse than me, or you don't give as much. We have to see or allow the person, situation, the space. So I'm talking about terms of partnerships and, people to people, but it's also if you invest a lot of life force into a project, but it's not bringing results, or there's no demand right now, and there's just no reciprocity. Again, withdraw the energy from it, fully bring it back into the spiral of life. In this spiral of life here, this is your vortex self. This is your goddess vortex state, a natural state of fully liberated goddess. This is what this video is called. And in that state, what you really want to feel is, where is life moving me next? And then whatever it is you're creating, I do that when I do my sacred devotional dancing. I just become the spiral. It's not just I'm attuning to spiral, I become the spiral, and then the energy moves out. So in an expression of my cosmic dance, what I actually do is, if I'm giving a lot to individuals, because sometimes I just love to do that, certain people are very easy to give or very easy to exchange with. But let's say there comes something that feels a little restrictive, or I'm not getting the same transparency level back, or I'm not getting the same interest, or I've shared with you before, like people who get fanatical is like they're really pushing to someone and they're not getting anything back, and they're continuously like sending energy to that person, like celebrities and the fanatic crazy fans. I had that too. I'm not even a celebrity, and I experienced that. It feels so restrictive on that part. And when you learn to simply witness it and then really, really just bring the energy back, withdraw the life force. Withdraw the life force does not mean you stop living. It means you withdraw it from that which maybe you've overly given to because there was no reciprocity moving through, and you bring it back here to the point of spiral. You don't contract it in a sense of ego. I'm contracting myself. I'm not giving you anymore. That's conditional. That's ego. The soul understanding and this higher mastery through life force as a living expression of our divinity is withdrawing that which you've invested in so many things and bringing it back to the spiral, because within this culmination point of the spiral, life will evolve naturally again, and the energy of life force will know where to go. And when I do that, I consciously create sacred dance rituals. So I hope this helped you. This spiral is the infinite life force, or creation itself. And like I said, from that creation perspective, it's just the principle of life. So I'm giving it to you, and it feels like it's a teaching, but it's just the principle of life, truly. So when we can apply that principle of life in our relationships, this is when we're embodying our Buddha self. We are engaging with the Buddha within us. We're not just saying, I am the Buddha. I am being the Buddha in mastery and practice. So my example of this cosmic dance, recently I had this experience, right? I didn't dance for so long. And then I just simply came one day into my vortex. This was right after the full moon in Scorpio. And I wasn't even trying to create dance, because I usually can say, I need to dance, and I don't. It's funny. I'll get tired, or I had this pain for a while here. Sorry. And in that moment, I just saw the dance, and I didn't even question it. I just put my clothes on and I just started dancing. And after a few songs, which is really that resonate home frequency for me, I wasn't anymore dancing. This is the difference when you feel that expansion of life. A week before, I used to do every day Tantric Life Force Mastery Yoga, which I do, to bring the elevation of new energy. And whenever I do it, I have so much energy. I can sleep. I have so much to do. It's like that deeply nurturing and creative. And so I needed that proper light quotient to build within me again after a very long stagnant winter. A lot of body changes as well. And when that occurred, after a few moments of just dancing, I became the dance. And this is when you melt. It's like your body is no longer the body you're kind of like in control of. And it was just that deep. And I started to cry, like not cry, tears, but when you're moved by life, and life moves within you, so life moves you. And I was just so happy. I felt such ecstatic, orgasmic bliss, that union. And afterwards, I knew there was enough light quotient that was built through my Tantric Life Force Mastery Yoga, that I was able to just bring it into the practice of dance. And then I became the dance itself. So to enter the Holy Spirit life force vortex, so that's the true liberated divine goddess self, which is the feminine principle of life, that raw nature, that raw power that moves things, but it moves them from the spiral. And it's not linear at all. That's why you can say, I'm going to dance tonight at this hour. When you're doing sacred dance, it's not even done as a ritual. Like I have to perform it to feel the magic. The magic already is. But then I tune into it at this kind of like a proper alignment when the spiral just takes everything else with it and it just all dissolves. So if you want to build up yourself that mastery understanding, there is a cosmic dance for the galactic human course I created. It's my cheapest course there is, so it's highly available. That's where I made it like this. It's on my Tantrika tab on the Serpina Light webpage. And as you know, I have my Tantrika Life Force Mastery course and Cosmic Ascension Union, which is the last one. The deepest initiation. And I know not a lot of people are ready to go that deep yet, because we all are where we are, and it's beautiful from that vantage point. But I truly recommend these, because in my own example, I can tell you this, my remembrance of that essence that I am as a Tantrika being, if I don't use it in my life, I can say, well, I am this being, okay. But am I utilizing the awakened presence of that being within me in my physical day-to-day life? Am I practicing it? That's the difference. So that's why these courses are there. We can all say, well, I know here, this, that, but then it's about the essence of that. So now I wish to, at the end, read you those beautiful writings, and then we're gonna move on to the rest. Okay, so are you ready? So the first writing is about that liberation of the sacred feminine. The feminine principle of life is on the rise, and this is not happening externally as some force moving through events. It is an inner force of life which is ready to co-create a new cycle of being on this planet through our own sacred bodies. Through eons of human history, the feminine aspect of creation has been witnessed, experienced, and interpreted in so many different ways. All these periods of ancient history have come and gone, birthed something, and then retreated to make room for new eras, and humanity has played many different roles, expanding from priesthoods to peasants. That's how it is. During all such cycles and experiences, the feminine force of creation, as the grace, beauty, and wisdom of life, has served different roles. Now she wants to be set free to just be. She no longer wants to be confined to a certain set of rules, beliefs, or even rituals. She does not want to be used or abused in ritual magic, which already lives in everything and everyone. That's the white light of creation. That's why we don't need a special form of ritual or divination to connect us to divinity, for divinity is not something we connect to. It is who we are. Magic is not within the ritual itself, but the life force energy that travels through everything and anything that we are already co-creating. The new feminine wisdom is without interfaces or intermediaries. She just is, and she is enough. She is pure life force embodied through us as illumined sovereigns, and through us she witnesses life fully liberated and free. She needs nothing or anyone to make her feel special, because she already is the very essence of life itself. These are not just words. No, they're not, although they're written as words. That's the new truth, which can only be felt and anchored intimately within our being, without the need for approval or confirmation from others. It is sacred and holy only when experienced within us as cosmic individuals. When you become the embodiment of the ritual itself, you no longer need to perform ritual as an act. You become it. And that is the highest state of illumination and Holy Spirit devotion we can offer to this world, especially at this time. So as you know, there is so much that people are now trying to create and trying to say, well, this is the goddess, or I want to embody the goddess, or I am the goddess. But this current state of what Gaia is, the planetary being, the goddess, the feminine principle of life, of her essence, the beauty, the grace of her majestic presence, and the people who are awakening their hearts, what this is about, okay? It's not so much about this creation when you need to put labels on it as, okay, that's coming now from the goddess, but just being with life, just letting life flow through you. because you already are the highest expression. So this is now the second thing I wrote just today. Every woman has an inner goddess as the spark of the divine. Therefore, she doesn't need to constantly say, I'm a goddess. This has become so overly popular, especially in the New Age movement, that nowadays everyone is so occupied with themselves and all that they say that they are. When the inner spark of the goddess flame, which is simply the feminine principle of life, is lit from within, the outside expression and embodiment will naturally follow. The true embodiment of the sacred feminine is humble and wise, not boastful and self-absorbed. And so she naturally witnesses the magic of life unfolding through her essence. There's a huge difference between the perception of I am a goddess or I am a living expression of the goddess essence of life. The difference might seem slight at first glance, where we are only witnessing it at the surface level, but then when we go deep with our genuine presence, we will notice the egoic identity versus the true magic of Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit is truly embodied within our sacred spark, that spark gradually becomes a flame. And that flame of the goddess as the feminine principle of life remembers its true divine love origin as the womb of the Divine Mother. In this sacred space, there is no division and separation. Every woman has a spark of the goddess within her, and so does every man. It comes through the divine principle of life embodied as a genderless human. It is the expression of pure life force, not a physical gender identity. And that expression of life can only birth divinity in form without allowing itself to become attached to the forms it's naturally birthing and illuminating life with its sacred presence. So that's the difference of truly gifting life through you, just birthing things naturally, not like, I need to give to that. Without me, there is no life. Without me, that wouldn't thrive, because a lot of even humanitarian causes are based on perception of lack. So instead of, when, let's say we're giving, and it's like the Master said, it's beautiful to give, but, look at the end result of all the giving. Are you really giving just what's needed, or are you giving this extra, which in the end, it will prove worthless or meaningless, because in truth, the life itself at that level of consciousness that it's being given to has not developed to that state of receiving it fully, because it hasn't learned to generate that level of reciprocity, the receptivity, and then reciprocity on its own. So part of any humanitarian, sorry, today I'm very tongue-tied, the energy is intense, and it's not my own language, so sometimes it's hard for me to pick up all very naturally. All these humanitarian, let's say, different structures, instead of just giving things and gathering resources, they also have to find a way to develop the proper tools and teachings so they can start building up, like in Africa, they're also doing the school system so that people can get, educated at very early stages of life, so they can start building up a foundation of life that will transcend that poverty consciousness eventually. Because when you're truly a sovereign, that poverty as consciousness cannot reach you. It's not about physically being cut off of life. As you know, Africa is one of the richest countries in terms of resources, all the crystals, the gemstones, diamonds, oil, everything it has. But then we say, why is the hardest poverty there? Well, ask yourself this question. Doesn't make sense, right? Does it? So it's about the state of consciousness. It's not about the level of richness that's there, but you can have all the beauties and riches of the world, but you don't know how to use them. It's like a car without gas. It doesn't run. Okay? So basically, when we start to really apply the principle of life through us, we are informing ourselves through the spiral wisdom, the spiral teaching, don't forget, and we're informing our relationships in this new way. We are creating seeds of new divine illumined partnership. Instead of just calling it a twin flame, call it what you really wish it to be. You wish it to be a sacred partnership. And sacred partnership is not about mothering and smothering and one playing the dominant part and being the dominant queen or king. It's about this divine equality of life that expresses itself at that moment in creation through two human individuals. And it's a beautiful expression in relationship when you do it consciously, when we do it through divine love and that beautiful equality. So that's this month's message. I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. It's what came through with such grace and integrity as always. Please subscribe to my blogs, Diary of an Ascension Pioneer, because that way you can directly receive the writing part of everything I share as well, and my beautiful pictures. I love my Flickr photography now. I hope you will enjoy the albums. All the links are down below. You can also support me on Patreon or just whatever, you know. I have this beautiful friend who always tells me, how do people not understand this unconditional giving? And I say, well, you know, people, until they really, really don't have that fear anymore, that if they give, they're going to have less, they're not going to do it, because they're constantly in that, you know, even if they make just one step, and even if they just give a tiny amount, even if it's like the heaviest thing they have to do, we have to start somewhere. Otherwise, life will be happening and you're going to wait for the event to happen so that you're going to grow in consciousness. But you haven't expanded your consciousness internally, so the external part will not feel, you know, the way you thought it would, except you do the work. And that's why I love Sadhguru's wisdom, because he always says the same. This and that can happen, but are you attuned to it? Can you perceive it? Will you even perceive it? What meaning will it have for you? If something does not hold a meaning, it can be interpreted and integrated, then it's meaningless. And that's why this new human consciousness can only flow from within. And then when we have events and things moving externally, which does happen from time to time, as you know, these cosmic cycles do produce events just as well. But it's most important for now, for us, to really attune to the inner wisdom, to integration, to be these alchemized beings from within. So Life Mastery awaits us. You can find more information about all these things and all the courses that will support you on this journey. And if you want, my personal sessions are always there for you as well, if you feel you need more support in that. So I wish you a beautiful month of May. So much love. Don't forget about my audiobooks. There's really beautiful attunements there. I'm going to talk to you again soon. Take care. So many blessings.
Come into my world, the world of the elven song, magical.